seat. John?
Hi everybody, my name is John Timmons. This is a very special day, this Veterans Day. As we've come here, it's a time of recognition, respect, remembrance, and for my great-great-grandfather over here, a rededication of his tomb. There's two people that I wish could be here today. My mother and my grandmother. My mother would be 103 and my grandmother would be 127. Both of them were longtime active members of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And to see this event happening today, they would be absolutely thrilled. They'd be sitting right here in the front row and they would be eating this up. My mother's name was Carrie Lou Williams, and my grandmother's name was Irene Thacker Williams. They joined the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and they used my grandmother's grandfather as their historical record and reference as a relative, veteran, that is. My mother submitted the paperwork after she was a member to get a supplemental certificate using my great-great-grandfather over there, Josiah A. Williams. As long as we're talking about veterans, his name was Ezekiel Dixon Thacker was the name that my mother and grandmother used as their ancestor. Ezekiel Thacker served in Cobb's Legion in Georgia. And we've heard of Cobb's Legion in the movie Gone with the Wind. If you've ever heard of Cobb's Legion, he served in Company A. My great-great-grandfather over here served in the Arkansas Infantry Volunteers. He was a chaplain and an officer. As long as we're talking about veterans, my great-great-grandfather's wife is buried next to him. Her maiden name was Averilla White. Averilla White's father, Benjamin Wofford White, served in the Mississippi Infantry in Company G. His brother was an infantry captain in the Mississippi Infantry. So if there's anybody here that's interested in joining the Sons of Confederate Veterans or the Daughters of the Confederacy, the documentation has already been done for any descendants of either of those two people buried over there. Way back when, around 1780, there was a Mr. and Mrs. Williams. They had a little boy and they needed to name him. So they didn't go to the New Testament and come up with a nice easy name like Matthew, Mark Williams, Luke and John Williams. They went to the Old Testament and they came up with the name Josiah, added Azekiah, and named this poor kid Josiah Azekiah Williams. And that name was such a winner, they used the name for the next 3 generations to follow. The first Josiah Azekiah Williams, they don't know when he was born. His tombstone says birth date unknown. But he died around 1878. He lived to be about 100 years old because it says they estimated he was 95 when he died. And that was the first J.A. Williams. That's all we need to know about him. The second J.A. Williams was this man buried over here, and I'll come back to him in a second. I forgot to hold this up. These are the pins and decorations and such that my mother and grandmother wore at different activities with the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And I'm gonna go on a tangent if that's okay. My mother was hosting a UDC meeting in Keystone Heights, and she found a speaker that would come into the house and talk, and she arranged it so that they would have their little business meeting at her house, and then told the speaker to come a little later. And as their meeting wrapped up and whatever, the doorbell rang, and Mom went to the door, and she was very surprised to see a man standing at the door with a young woman. And this man, she was just shocked to see this guy. He had the hat, he had the sword, he had the belt, and he had a pistol, and he had his saddle. And when Mom got over the shock of seeing this man in his impeccable uniform, she opened the door a little wider to let this Union officer into her house. So she invited these two Yankees into her house. She was dressed as a nurse. He was dressed as an Army captain. And he took his saddlebag apart and took everything out of his saddlebag and showed all the things. He took off his gun belt and he took everything out and showed all his ammunition and all this stuff, and they had a great time. So, I was saying there was 4 J.A. Williamses in a row. I just talked about number 1. I'm going to talk about number 2 in a second. And just for fun, I'm going to talk about J.A. Williams number 4 and J.A. Williams number 3. This was my grandfather. He went by the name of Azzy Williams. This was his father, who went by the name of Azekiah Williams. Now these two guys had something in common. besides their name. My grandfather got shot by the First Baptist Church in Cedar Key, and his father got shot 3 times in Otter Creek. They raised him tough down here in Levy County. Hezekiah Williams had a big mouth, and people around here had a problem because Levy County was dry and the city limits of Cedar Key was wet. He had a problem with dirty politicians, dirty law enforcement, stills, hooch. All this activity with booze was going on, and he had a big mouth. And he was kind of a hard guy to shut up because he was 6'4" and a guy you didn't want to mess with. So a hired gunman was called in to kill him. He was the railroad agent for Bronson, Otter Creek, and Elsie. And he was at the Otter Creek train station when he heard this gunman was looking for him. And he came in the train station and he shot Hezekiah Williams. But he didn't know he was cleaning his gun. He heard this guy was looking for him, and he had a gun in his hand. And he shot this guy named Wright Ellis in the chin and the heart, killing him. But as Wright Ellis fell, the gun went off 2 more times, hitting Hezekiah Williams 2 more times. And he walked out of the train station bleeding from 3 bullet holes and never fell down. I was saying that they raised him tough down here in Levy County. He had 7 kids with his wife. He had 3 more kids with a girlfriend he had on the side. He lived to be 79 years old, surviving those 3 bullet holes. At the age of 70, he had a baby with his 24-year-old girlfriend. So you never know what's next around here. When you ask me to talk about the family, you're going to get the icing and you're getting the burnt toast at the same time. Now I'm going to talk about my great-great-grandfather over here. He was a Methodist, and he was a Methodist circuit rider. And a circuit rider was a guy who was a pastor of a territory. And his territory was in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And he would go around the region doing church work. He'd go to little crossroads in different places that didn't have a church, or they would have a church maybe in a schoolhouse, or any place they could find to have church, somebody's barn. And as he traveled around the countryside, he did baptisms, weddings, funerals, church services, 7 days a week, any time of day. And he would move on to the next town where he continued doing his church work. He was a Methodist circuit rider, what they called it. I've seen something that was about a Methodist conference, and it was in 1859. So I knew that he was involved with that at that time, and I've got something here. Let me find it. Oh, I know what it is. When he was doing his Methodist circuit riding, he joined the military in November of 1861. And he went into the Arkansas Infantry Volunteers. He was discharged in February of 1863, and he married Averilla White about 2 weeks before he got out of the service. I'm going to read to you what this photocopy is. But this is a pay voucher for Josiah A. Williams, voucher 2729, for the amount of $71.13. It's dated February 6, 1862, for services rendered as chaplain, 7th Arkansas Volunteers. When he was doing his Methodist circuit rider ministry, this book, he was also an attorney, or call him a lawyer, whatever. This was his book that he had in his saddlebag, along with his Bible. It's a law book. Many people in the Civil War got tuberculosis, and that's a deadly disease that it's even hard to shake it today with modern medicine. But Josiah Williams, or I'm going to just call him Reverend Josiah. I get so confused on all four of them. This is Reverend Josiah for the rest of today. Reverend Josiah had tuberculosis very bad, and it was believed if you moved to a new climate, it was better for your health. He was a man of means. He had money, and he sold everything up in Arkansas. They were going to start a new life in Key West for the climate. So they got on a ship, and on their way to Key West, for some reason, the ship came into Cedar Key in December of 1871. Reverend Josiah and his wife got off the ship, and they had 2 children, Hezekiah that I just told you about, and he had a little sister named Benjamina. Never heard the name Benjamina before, but she was named after her grandfather that I just mentioned, Benjamin Lawford White. Benjamina was 3 years old, Hezekiah was 8 years old, and they came to Cedar Key, and he was in bad shape. He didn't live much longer. He died in January of 1872. Now that sign over there says this cemetery was founded in 1872, and it's a very good chance that he was among the first bodies, if not the first body, to be buried in this cemetery. He was 45 years old when he died. Avarilla was 18 years younger. She was 27. And he was buried here, and a year later she remarried. And she married a guy named Robert Marvin Elsie, another Methodist circuit rider. Except his territory was here in Levy County, and he started the Elsie Methodist Church that you see down the road over here. So she became a preacher's wife once again, and Reverend Elsie is buried behind the Elsie Methodist Church with his first 2 wives. After Avarilla died, she was buried here with her first husband, the father of her 2 children. I could close this and talk about Veterans Day, or I thought about, should I tell you about his funeral? So I decided I'm going to talk about his funeral instead. When someone dies with a deadly disease like tuberculosis, you cannot have a traditional funeral. The body's full of of deadly bacteria. You just can't have an open casket and a viewing and all that stuff. We learned from Azzy's brother in an old letter that Reverend Josiah was buried in a Fisk casket. A Fisk casket was made of cast iron, and they put the body in a cast iron casket. A couple of guys would pick up this great big heavy lid and put it on the box, and essentially sealing the body inside this protective cast iron box. Now you can have a normal funeral because the lid of a Fisk casket has a glass window. You can't make this stuff up. So they had a normal funeral with a Fisk casket, and people could walk by and look down the glass window and say goodbye to the deceased. And then I was wondering, you know, that cast iron casket's it's a pretty heavy beast. Did they dig a hole and lower him 6 feet in the ground? Or did they just place that cast iron casket on the ground and build that mound over it with bricks and concrete? So I believe Reverend Josiah is buried above ground in a Fisk casket, and sometime later Averilla died and was buried next to her first husband. Her name was Averilla White Williams Elsie. And I think that's all I've got for you today. I'm going to put these things somewhere after a while. People can look at these pictures and a couple of things. And I thought I saw my cousin start laughing a minute ago. His grandfather's the one that shot my grandfather. And that's another story. They were 6 and 8 years old. And here's a picture of them in their 80s like nothing ever happened. They're a happy group. And here they are. So I hope that I've shared a little information. Another picture of my grandfather Azzy in World War I. And again, this is a very special day, Veterans Day. We honor everyone with respect who served. And they served well, and I'm confident that Reverend Josiah is in heaven, and he's looking down right now at what's going on here. Either that or he's in the Fisk casket looking straight up.